What you are about to witness is a fascinating interview with a gentleman called Christopher Spencer, or rather that is his pen name. He has to conceal his real name. In the following interview, Christopher speaks about his 50 plus years in the world of high-level finance, both as a banker and a finance and investment broker. He covers everything from international espionage to covert financial agreements, conmen, murder, war, and more, with a touch of personal flair. Everything you are about to hear is true. Some questions were pre-agreed and scripted to explain specific content in his books. Most are not. You can find details of where to buy his books in the video description below. This is part 14. So, working in the career that you've had, you've obviously encountered situations where you've had to make difficult ethical decisions. Can you give us an example of such a situation and how you navigated it? Now, obviously, your career, without going into too much detail here, has kind of been split into several different episodes, shall we say. So you don't necessarily have to speak to just the financial side.
Well, I give an example here, I think, of a project that I was working on in the 1980s, and it was a consortium of British companies. I won't mention the country concerned, but it is a very corrupt country. And there has been a recent example in this country of a massive fraud, which has been investigated. The Prime Minister at the time of this fraud is now in prison, I'm pleased to say. And I was working in this country, a particular country, with a major project there. I'm not going to mention the project, but there were, as I say, 2 or 3 British companies involved. My colleague in the other company that was dealing and was heading up the financial side of life actually took a holiday, and I deputized for him. He took a long holiday, it was about a month. And it does happen like this. The very Monday after he disappeared on holiday to some nice overseas spot, I had a phone call, and it was from the aid agency of the British government, and we were asking for some aid for this particular project. Now, I knew the level of corruption that there was in this project, the percentage that was going to be used to make sure that this project happened in this corrupt country. I was called to a meeting in this particular ministry, and I sat there in a room with about 20 people. They were all civil servants representing different ministries. He was a very senior man in this particular ministry. He had on either side of him his assistants. We sat there and proceedings continued, and as I said, I was the only man representing the private sector. He suddenly put a question to me. He said to me, "Can you tell me how much corruption there is in this particular project?" I looked at him and I said, "Can we go out to a private room, please, to your office?" I did that because I wasn't going to tell the truth in front of 20 people, but only to him personally, as he was a senior man. We went into his office. I said to him, "Look, I'm making the decision now to tell you how much the level of corruption in this particular project is. It is obviously highly confidential and should only be handled by your colleagues at a very senior level in the civil service." I then told him the level of corruption. He kind of slightly gasped. But the civil service went with it, and they found a solution. And I'm pleased to say Britain did get that project. But it was in the full knowledge of transparency that I said and told him the answer. I had to make the moral choice. The moral choice was to say either I'm not going to tell you, and maybe they would have found out later, or to be honest at that point and say, yes, very much in private and in confidence, this is what the level was, and I rely then on you to try and progress this project. The project happened, We won the project. It was a great project. It worked. But the moral decision was there at that time, and I had to take it.
So obviously people think the finance industry has a reputation for being cutthroat and ruthless. In your experience, how accurate is that stereotype?
It's mixed. You will find people who are cutthroat and ruthless, and I met two bankers fairly recently, well, within the last few years, and I came to, they were very nice and entertained me royally to very nice lunches, but I was a little suspicious of them, and they used my name and position, my real name and real position, to help them set up a company. I was the first chairman of that company for about a year, and then they brought in some other people. And since then, the company was then floated on the AIM market of the London Stock Exchange as a medium-sized company. Since then, it's just gone downhill, I'm sorry to say. But they have benefited, and so have their fellow directors benefited considerably from what they have managed to raise by way of public shareholding. And occasionally they launch some more shares and get some more money in, and then they use it up to pay themselves. I suppose this is the ruthlessness, as I say. They were also involved in another exercise which I will not name, except that I decided it was to the detriment of Britain. And I found myself in a position of meeting with a representative of the Secret Intelligence Service one day, and I brought this to their attention. As a result, I do hope, or perhaps I believe, but it may have not have been me at all, that the activity that these gentlemen were trying to do was put an end to. I've had other examples of that in my life as well. Having said that, there are professional and genuine and reasonably honest people and positions in the financial world. I think there are two types of people in the financial world. There is the workers, if you like, that sit on the telephones in the call centres and answer, and they do their jobs to the best of their ability. And then there are the top people that float from bank to bank and from position to position, or come in at the top of a bank or a financial organization from another type of organization and try and learn about the financial side. That usually is very difficult because it takes a lot of time to understand exactly what you are doing. Most of those people wish to have very good salaries and very good bonuses, and they might end up doing things that are not in the interest of the bank or indeed the public. Others, of course, are honest and try to keep the financial institution on what you might call the straight and narrow, and not become a liability to the taxpayer.
As someone who's worked with governments and large corporations, how do you feel about the power dynamic between those two entities and the general public? Do you think there's enough transparency and accountability in those relationships?
Yeah, the short answer to that is no. I've talked about rich people and powerful people. At the top of powerful corporations, they too have the advantages. They can entertain politicians to very good lunches, which is always nice, but other things as well, even more expensive and attractive. This happens, of course, in developing countries more than it happens in developed countries, but it still happens there. Politicians like to be in the company of these powerful people. Makes them feel powerful as well. So the dynamic as far as ordinary people are concerned, is that they can lose control of the oversight and the controls that are necessary on this situation. Things can happen which ordinary people don't know about, and only later does it come about that this particular company had an influence. I mean, I admit it. I've used this kind of influence myself on government. I learned at quite an early stage in my career how to influence government, win friends and influence people, both ministers and civil servants. I did it in the UK, I did it in other countries, but usually I did it because I thought it was what I was proposing was a good thing to do. It would create employment, it would create trade, it would create investment, not only in the UK, but also in other countries overseas. I hope I wasn't deluding myself. I believed that this was the case, and therefore I had, I suppose, in my own mind, a moral judgment that I was doing the right thing and that I was influencing them in the right way. This may not be the case for other people.
So given all your experience, particularly in high-level finance, and how you got into it in a kind of roundabout way, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out in the field?
I think at the start of my career, I was a very naive junior bank clerk who then studied very hard on my banking exams and then taking an economics degree. I wish I'd have known, I think, more about how the real world works. And that's why really I've written the stories that I have. I want to pass them down to the younger generation of this is the way the world works. I think that at that age you very often have a much too rosy a view of the world. You don't understand the corruption that goes on, the motivation that you see in people. You don't understand the international world, how countries are very, very different from our own. They are completely based on a different history. The people in those countries think in a completely different kind of way, have different mores, different traditions, and just think differently. And the sooner you learn that, the better. So what I would suggest to a young man or a young woman starting off in finance, and I really do say to young women as well, have a go at it. But I think that what you should do is to get a wide experience as possible. How can you do that? Well, travel. That's the first thing. Don't stay in one country too long, but stay there long enough to understand that country, to understand some of the ways that the people think in that country. And then begin to realize that, we think in one way in the UK or in the United States or wherever in your home country, but then there are all these other countries out there in different parts of the world also think differently as well. Try to understand how other people think in other countries. Secondly, go through various organizations. I mean, I had the experience in commercial banking and then in merchant banking and then in investment banking. So try and rotate and understand the various functions in banking and what they might cover. These days it would cover a commercial bank, the 4 or 5 bigger commercial banks, or maybe one of the more electronic banks, the newer banks that are now around. Understand how a stockbroking firm works. Understand how a merchant banking facility might work, and some of the major accountants who, for example, now have taken over the role very much used to be in the shape of the merchant banks. And get qualifications as well, because you've got to get the formal qualification. It doesn't matter what it is in a way, except it should be financially oriented. It could be the financial examinations, which they now have. It could be an accountancy qualification, which is always very useful because you get the ability to deal with figures. But get one basic qualification. That helps. It doesn't have to be 2 or 3 qualifications. It can be one which is financially orientated in some way. Travel and then have the experience of working in different organizations. When you've got that, and when you might be 30 years old, you could then perhaps start thinking about setting up your own organization and perhaps then making a success of it, hopefully making a success of it.